Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. The brass key felt warm against my palm, which made no sense since it had been sitting in a safety deposit box for 3 years. I turned it over, studying the strange symbols etched along its shaft. Not Latin. I would have recognized that from all those Sunday masses Dad dragged me to. These looked older, like something carved into cave walls before people knew how to write properly. My name is Daniel Romano, and up until yesterday, I thought my father sold insurance for a living. Turns out, Father Vincent Romano had a completely different job description, one that involved flying to Rome every few months and keeping a locked room in our basement that I was never allowed to enter. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had been apologetic when he handed me the envelope. Your father left specific instructions. Said you weren't ready until you turned 25. Guess he figured you'd need to be old enough to handle whatever this is. Inside the envelope was the key, an address in Boston, and a handwritten note that simply read, "The work isn't finished. Storage Unit 247. Everything you need is there. Trust Father DeMarco." That was it. 25 years of birthday dinners and Christmas mornings, and the most important conversation we ever had happened after he was already in the ground. I drove to Boston the next morning, following the GPS to a storage facility wedged between a Chinese restaurant and a discount tire shop. The key fit perfectly into Unit 247, and when I lifted the metal door, the smell hit me immediately. Old leather, candle wax, and something else I couldn't place. Something medicinal, like the disinfectant they use in hospitals. But sweeter. The unit was packed floor to ceiling with wooden crates, each one labeled with dates going back 15 years. I opened the nearest one and found journals. Dozens of them, all written in my father's neat handwriting. I flipped through the first few pages of one dated 3 years ago. Subject displayed classic signs of oppression. Temperature in the room dropped 11 degrees within minutes. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh reported objects moving on their own for 6 weeks prior to our arrival. Standard protocol applied successfully after 4 hours. My hand shook as I turned the pages. Each entry was clinical, matter of fact, like he was documenting a science experiment. But the things he described, people speaking languages they had never learned. Furniture sliding across rooms. Grown adults suddenly unable to remember their own names for days at a time. I grabbed another journal. This one from 7 years ago. The handwriting was the same, but the cases were different. More severe. A woman in Phoenix who hadn't slept for 3 months straight, but showed no signs of exhaustion. A family in Detroit whose house temperature wouldn't rise above 40 degrees. Even with the heat running constantly. A teenager in Miami who could accurately predict the exact time anyone in her presence would die down to the minute. The church has been documenting these incidents for centuries. One entry read, "But the frequency is increasing. What once happened a few times per year now occurs monthly. Something is changing and we need to understand what." I spent the rest of the afternoon reading, moving from crate to crate. Each journal revealed another layer of my father's secret life. There were expense reports for flights to cities I didn't even know he had visited. Hotel receipts from places like Baton Rouge, Spokane, and Albuquerque. Equipment purchase orders for items with names I couldn't pronounce. Electromagnetic field detectors. Thermal imaging cameras. Something called a spectral analysis device. The journals painted a picture of my father I had never seen. He wasn't just a weekend Catholic who complained about the priest's sermons being too long. He was part of something bigger. Something that required him to travel across the country dealing with situations that sounded like movie plots. But what struck me most was his writing style. These weren't the ramblings of someone who had lost touch with reality. They were methodical, scientific, filled with measurements and observations. He approached each case like a researcher, documenting temperature changes, electromagnetic readings, behavioral patterns. Whatever he was investigating, he was treating it with the same rigor as a laboratory experiment. But the most disturbing entries weren't about the cases themselves. They were about what happened afterward. Subject retained no memory of the incident. Family believes she suffered a brief illness. Standard memory protocols successful. All physical evidence removed. Local authorities informed that the death was due to natural causes. Case closed. Witnesses relocated. New identities provided. Cover story implemented successfully. The church wasn't just investigating these incidents. They were covering them up, erasing them from public record, making sure no one would ever know what really happened. And my father had been part of that system for years. As the sun started to set, I found what I was looking for. A crate labeled current case files with dates from just 2 months before Dad died. Inside were 3 thick folders, each one marked with a red stamp that read Priority Level Alpha. The first folder contained photographs that made my stomach turn. A house in Salem where every mirror had cracked in an identical pattern, creating the same symbol on each reflective surface. A woman in Burlington whose skin had developed raised marks that spelled out words in a language no translator could identify. A family in Hartford whose youngest child had been drawing the same picture every day for 8 months. A detailed architectural blueprint of a building that didn't exist. But it was the third folder that made me understand why Dad had waited until I was 25 to leave me this inheritance. The cover page had a single name written across the top. Daniel Romano. Inside were photographs of me. Recent ones. Me leaving my apartment. Me at work. Me buying groceries. Someone had been watching me for months, documenting my daily routine with the thoroughness of a private investigator. But these weren't surveillance photos taken from a distance. These were close-ups shot from angles that should have been impossible without me noticing. One photo showed me sleeping in my own bed, taken from directly above. Another captured me in my bathroom brushing my teeth. A third showed me sitting at my kitchen table reading a book. But the person taking the picture would have had to be standing right next to me. At the bottom of the stack was a medical report with my name on it. Blood work, brain scans, genetic testing, all done without my knowledge or consent. The results were highlighted in yellow with handwritten notes in the margins. Subject shows genetic markers consistent with sensitivity. Bloodline traces back to documented cases from 1800s Italian records. Preliminary testing suggests inherited capability. Currently dormant. Recommend immediate observation and preparation for recruitment. I sat in the storage unit until well after dark, reading and rereading the file. My father hadn't just worked for the church's supernatural investigation department. He had been preparing me to take his place, studying me like a lab rat to determine if I had inherited whatever genetic quirk made him useful to them. The last document in the folder was a letter addressed to me sealed in an envelope with yesterday's date written on it. Daniel, it began. If you're reading this, then you found my real work and you know why I kept it from you. The truth is I never wanted this life for myself and I certainly didn't want it for you. But the work chooses us, not the other way around. The cases I documented represent only a fraction of what's happening. The incidents are becoming more frequent and more severe. The church has theories about why, but no real answers. What we do know is that certain people have the ability to detect and interact with these phenomena in ways others cannot. Your bloodline carries this ability. It manifests differently in each generation, but it always manifests. In my grandfather, it was the ability to sense when these incidents were about to occur. In my father, it was immunity to their effects. In me, it was the capacity to end them. I don't know what form it will take in you, but I know it's there. The testing confirms it. You have the genetic markers, the brain structure, the family history. The church has been waiting for you to come of age so they can begin your training. But here's what they don't know. I've been preparing for this moment for years. Everything in this storage unit represents 20 years of careful documentation. Not just of the cases themselves, but of the church's methods, their protocols, their cover-up procedures. I've been building a complete record of their operations. You have a choice to make, son. You can contact Father Ritchie at the number included in this envelope and allow yourself to be recruited into their organization. You'll receive training, resources, and support. You'll help people who are experiencing things they can't understand. But you'll also become part of their cover-up machine, helping to bury evidence and erase memories. Or you can use what I've left you to expose the truth. The documents in this unit represent proof that these phenomena are real and that the church has been hiding them from the public for decades. You could take this to journalists, researchers, anyone who would listen. Either way, you won't be able to ignore what you are much longer. The ability is already starting to manifest. You've probably noticed small things. Dreams that feel too real. Moments where you know things you shouldn't know. Times when electronic devices malfunction around you for no apparent reason. I'm sorry I couldn't prepare you for this in person. I'm sorry I had to lie to you for so many years. But I wanted you to have as normal a childhood as possible before this responsibility fell on your shoulders. Whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you, and know that the work, whatever form it takes, is important. These phenomena are real and they affect real people. Someone needs to help them, whether that's through the church's established system or through some other means you create. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. They've been watching you and they won't wait much longer. Love, Dad. P.S. Check Unit 248. I rented it under your name. You'll find something there that might help you decide. I sat in the silence of the storage facility for a long time after finishing the letter. 25 years of normal life, and now I was supposed to choose between joining a secret church organization or exposing them to the world. No pressure. But Dad was right about one thing. I had been noticing small things. Dreams where I walked through places I had never been but that felt familiar. Moments where I would know exactly what someone was about to say before they said it. Electronics that would glitch or shut down when I was stressed or angry. I had always assumed these were coincidences, the kind of weird little things that happen to everyone. But now they felt different. They felt like symptoms. Unit 248 was directly next to 247. And when I used the key to open it, I found something completely unexpected. It wasn't another collection of documents or case files. It was a workshop. Workbenches lined the walls covered with tools and equipment I didn't recognize. Microscopes, spectrometers, computers with software I had never seen. In the center of the room was a metal table with restraint straps like something from a medical examination room. But what caught my attention was the wall of photographs. Hundreds of them pinned to a large corkboard. They showed the same symbol over and over again. The symbol I had seen in the first folder. The one that had appeared in the cracked mirrors. The equipment in the workshop was unlike anything I had seen before. Dad had modified standard scientific instruments, adding components that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. A digital thermometer with copper wiring wrapped around the sensor. An electromagnetic field detector with small mirrors attached to the display screen. A laptop computer with what looked like religious medallions taped to the keyboard. According to his notes, these modifications weren't random. They were based on decades of experimentation, finding ways to measure phenomena that traditional science couldn't detect. The copper wiring helped stabilize temperature readings in environments where spiritual activity caused rapid fluctuations. The mirrors on the EMF detector reflected energy signatures that were otherwise invisible to electronic sensors. The medallions on the laptop created a kind of protective barrier that prevented supernatural interference with digital data. He had also developed techniques that weren't in any church manual. Methods for communicating with entities without formal exorcism rituals. Ways to negotiate peaceful resolutions instead of forced removals. Protocols for helping people understand and integrate their experiences rather than forgetting them entirely. One shelf contained dozens of audio recordings, each one labeled with a date and location. I played a few at random and heard conversations between Dad and various entities. Not the dramatic confrontations I had expected, but calm discussions that sounded more like therapy sessions than supernatural battles. "I understand you're frustrated," Dad's voice said on one recording. "You've been trying to communicate with Mrs. Patterson for months, but she can't hear you the way you need her to. Let's find a different approach." The entity's response was barely audible, more like a whisper of wind than actual speech. But Dad seemed to understand it perfectly. "Yes, I know the household's significance for you, but causing the temperature to drop isn't helping anyone. Mrs. Patterson is scared, and scared people don't listen well. What if we tried something less dramatic?" The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Dad patiently working out a compromise that would allow the entity to communicate its message without terrorizing the homeowner. It was problem-solving, not warfare. Counseling, not conquest. Each photograph was labeled with a location and date. The earliest ones were from 15 years ago, scattered across different states. But as the dates got more recent, the locations got closer together. All within a 100-mile radius of Boston. All within the last 2 years. And at the center of the board was a map with red pins marking each location. The pins formed a perfect circle around Boston, with my apartment building sitting exactly in the center. I spent the night in that storage unit reading through everything my father had left me. As the hours passed, I began to understand not just what he had been doing, but why he had hidden it from me for so long. There were personal notes scattered throughout the journals. Observations about the toll this work took on the people who did it. Another investigator transferred out today. One entry read, "Says he can't handle the isolation anymore. You can't tell anyone what you do for a living. Can't explain why you're gone for weeks at a time. Can't share the burden of what you've seen. The divorce rate in our department is 90%. Another note written just after my high school graduation. "Daniel got accepted to 3 colleges today. Watched him open the letters. Saw how excited he was about his future. How do I tell him that future might not be his to choose? How do I explain that his DNA might have already decided his career path?" There were photographs tucked between the pages of some journals. Pictures of me as a child at Christmas morning, at baseball games, at school events, but also pictures of Dad at crime scenes, in hospitals, in places that looked like war zones, but were actually someone's living room after a supernatural incident. One photo showed him standing in what used to be a kitchen in Denver. The walls were covered in burn marks that formed intricate patterns like circuit boards etched in carbon. According to the case notes, a family of 4 had experienced spontaneous electrical phenomena for 3 weeks. Every electronic device in the house had either exploded or melted. The parents had been hospitalized with electrical burns, and the children had been temporarily placed in protective custody. Dad had solved the case, helped the family, restored their home and their memories. But the photo showed him afterward sitting on the front steps of the house, looking older than his years, exhausted, haunted, the same expression I had seen on his face during my childhood, usually late at night when he thought no one was looking. I realized that every time I had seen that expression, he had just returned from a case. Every mysterious business trip, every weekend when he seemed distant and preoccupied. Every time he would stare out the window during dinner like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. He had been carrying the weight of someone else's trauma, helping them heal while slowly breaking apart himself. The incidents my father had been investigating weren't random. They were connected, part of a pattern that was leading to something bigger. And whatever that something was, it was almost here. I had a choice to make, just like Dad said. But looking at that map, seeing the way everything pointed toward my own address, I realized the choice had already been made for me. The work wasn't finished. And like it or not, I was about to become part of it. I called Father DeMarco at 6 o'clock in the morning. "Daniel," he said before I even introduced myself. His voice carried a slight Italian accent. Warm but tired. "I've been expecting your call. How much did you find?" "Everything," I said. "The journals, the case files, the workshop, all of it." "Ah, your father was very thorough. Are you at the storage facility now?" "Yes." "Good. Don't leave. I'm 20 minutes away." Father DeMarco arrived in a black sedan that looked like every government car I had ever seen in movies. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with graying hair and the kind of calm expression that suggested he had seen things that would make most people run screaming. "Your father spoke of you often," he said as we shook hands. He was very proud, but also very worried. He knew this day would come, but he hoped it would be later. The letter said, "I have a choice," I said. "You do. But first you need to understand what you're choosing between." He led me back into Unit 248, moving with the familiarity of someone who had been there before. "Your father built this workshop to study the phenomena independently. The church has its own facilities, of course, but Yeppy wanted to conduct his own research. He suspected that the official investigations weren't telling the complete story." "What did he find?" Father DeMarco walked to the map on the wall, studying the pattern of red pins. "The incidents aren't random, as you've probably figured out. They're part of a sequence building towards something specific. Your father spent years tracking the pattern, trying to predict where it would lead." "It leads here," I said, pointing to the pin marking my apartment. "To me, yes, but not in the way you might think." He turned to face me. "These incidents aren't targeting you, Marcus. They're preparing for you." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a timeline. Each incident was marked with a date and location, creating a visual map of the progression I had read about in the journals. "Every case your father investigated involved people who had abilities similar to yours. The genetic markers, the sensitivity to these phenomena. But in each case, something went wrong. The abilities manifested too early, too suddenly, without proper preparation or understanding. What happened to them? Some died. Others lost their sanity. A few simply disappeared. And we never found out what became of them. But all of them had one thing in common. They tried to handle their abilities alone, without guidance or training." Father DeMarco sat down on one of the workbenches. "The church has been studying these abilities for centuries. We've developed methods for safely managing the manifestation process, techniques for controlling and directing the capabilities once they emerge. But it requires careful preparation and close supervision. And if I refuse, then you'll go through the manifestation process on your own without support or understanding. Based on what we've observed in similar cases, you have perhaps 6 months before the abilities fully emerge. During that time, you'll experience increasingly severe symptoms, hallucinations, loss of time, difficulty distinguishing between reality and whatever dimension these phenomena originate from." He showed me more photographs from the case files. People who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks, their eyes wide and unfocused. Medical reports describing seizures, psychological breaks, complete personality changes. "This is what happens when the manifestation process goes wrong," he said. "And it goes wrong in about 80% of cases where the subject tries to handle it alone." I studied the photographs trying to imagine myself looking like that in 6 months. What exactly would the church training involve? 6 months at a facility in Rome. You would learn to control the abilities as they manifest. Understand their limitations and applications. After that, you would be assigned to investigation teams like your father's. The work is difficult, but it's important, and it's the safest way to manage what's happening to you. And the cover-ups, the memory erasers. Father DeMarco sighed. A necessary evil. I'm afraid the general public isn't ready for the truth about these phenomena. If word got out, it would cause panic, make our job infinitely more difficult. People would see supernatural activity everywhere, real or imagined. The hoaxes and false reports would make it nearly impossible to identify genuine cases. So, you just decide what people get to know about their own lives. We protect them from knowledge that would harm them. The families we help go back to normal lives, free from the trauma of what they experienced. Isn't that better than leaving them with memories that would haunt them forever? I wanted to argue, but I had read the case files. I had seen the descriptions of what these people went through. Maybe forgetting was a mercy. There's something else. Father DeMarco said. Something your father discovered in his final months that he didn't include in the official reports. He led me to a locked cabinet in the corner of the workshop. Inside were more journals. These ones written in a shorthand code that took me a few minutes to decipher. The incidents aren't just increasing in frequency. Father DeMarco explained. They're changing in nature, becoming more aggressive, more targeted. Your father believed that something was actively causing them, directing them toward a specific goal. The coded journals painted a disturbing picture. Recent cases involved not just people experiencing supernatural phenomena, but people being deliberately selected and modified by them. Subjects would disappear for days or weeks, then return with no memory of where they had been, but with new abilities they couldn't control. It's like something is building an army. One entry read, recruiting people with the genetic markers and enhancing their capabilities beyond normal manifestation levels. But for what purpose? The final entry, dated just a week before Dad died, was the most unsettling. I think I know what it wants. It's not building an army to fight us. It's building one to replace us. Every person it recruits is someone who would have joined our organization under normal circumstances. It's creating its own version of our teams, but without our oversight or ethical constraints. Your father believed that you were always the primary target. Father DeMarco said all the other incidents were just preparation ways of studying how to approach someone with your particular genetic profile. He thought that whatever is behind this has been planning your recruitment for years. Recruitment for what? We don't know. But your father's final theory was that it wanted to create a new kind of supernatural investigator. Someone with abilities more powerful than anything we've seen before, but without the moral framework that guides our work. I sat down heavily on one of the workbenches. So, my choices are join the church or get recruited by some supernatural entity that wants to use me for unknown purposes. Unless you have a third option in mind. I did actually. I had been thinking about it all night. What if I don't run from the manifestation? But I don't join either organization. What if I use what Dad left me to help people independently? Father DeMarco looked surprised. That would be incredibly dangerous. Without proper training, the manifestation process alone could kill you. And if you survived it, you'd be facing the same phenomena that trained teams sometimes struggle with. But it's possible. Theoretically, yes. Your father's research was quite comprehensive. If you studied his methods carefully, understood the equipment he built, you might be able to develop your abilities safely. But you would be completely on your own. I stood up and walked to the map on the wall, studying the pattern of pins one more time. Each pin represented people who had needed help, who had experienced things they couldn't understand or control. The church had helped them, but had also erased their memories, hidden the truth, made sure no one would ever know what really happened. What if people deserve to know the truth? I said. What if instead of covering these incidents up, someone worked to document them, study them, help people understand what they experienced? The chaos would be enormous. Father DeMarco said, society isn't equipped to handle that kind of revelation. Maybe not all at once, but gradually, carefully, with proper explanation and support. I turned to face him. I want to take a fourth option. I want to use Dad's research to safely manage my own manifestation. Then I want to use his equipment and methods to help people who experience these phenomena. But without the memory erasers or cover-ups. I want to create a support network for people like me. People who have these abilities but don't want to work for either the church or whatever entity is trying to recruit them. Father DeMarco was quiet for a long time. Your father would be proud, he finally said, and probably terrified. What you're proposing has never been attempted before. Then maybe it's time someone tried. He nodded slowly. If you're determined to do this, I can't stop you. But I can help you. Unofficially. Of course. The church would never approve. But I believe in what you're trying to do. Over the next 3 months, Father DeMarco helped me understand my father's research. We worked through the journals together, learning the techniques Dad had developed for safely managing ability manifestation. We tested the equipment he had built, modified some of it, built new tools based on his designs. The manifestation process was exactly as difficult as Father DeMarco had warned. There were weeks when I couldn't sleep, when every electronic device I touched would malfunction, when I would have conversations with people who weren't there. But Dad's methods worked. Slowly, carefully, I learned to control what was happening to me. The first sign had been the dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but vivid experiences that felt more real than my waking life. I would find myself standing in houses I had never visited, watching scenes play out like movies. A woman in Phoenix arguing with someone who wasn't there. A family in Detroit huddled around a space heater in the middle of summer. A teenager in Miami drawing the same architectural blueprint over and over. Tears streaming down her face. Took me weeks to realize I wasn't just dreaming about random people. I was seeing the subjects from Dad's case files, experiencing their encounters as if I had been there myself. The ability was manifesting as a form of psychic connection to other people with similar sensitivities. Father DeMarco called it sympathetic resonance. People with our genetic markers were naturally drawn to each other across distance, creating a kind of supernatural network. As my abilities strengthened, I could tap into that network more deliberately, sensing when someone was experiencing phenomena. Even from hundreds of miles away, the physical symptoms were harder to manage. Electronics would short out when I was stressed. Light bulbs would explode when I lost my temper. I went through 3 laptops in a month before Father DeMarco taught me meditation techniques to control the energy discharge. But the most challenging part was learning to distinguish between my own thoughts and the experiences I was picking up from others. There were days when I would wake up convinced I was a 60-year-old woman in Nebraska or a college student in Oregon. The boundaries between my consciousness and theirs would blur until I couldn't remember which memories belonged to me. The abilities that emerged were unlike anything described in the church files. I could sense supernatural phenomena from miles away, pinpoint their exact location, even determine their nature and intensity without investigating directly. More importantly, I could communicate with the entities causing them, negotiate with them, sometimes convince them to leave without any kind of confrontation. 6 months after finding the storage units, I opened my own practice. I called it Romano Consulting, and I advertised it as psychological counseling for people experiencing unusual phenomena. No medical degrees or church authorization. Just someone who understood what they were going through and could help them make sense of it. The first case came within a week. A woman in Cambridge whose house had been experiencing temperature fluctuations and unexplained sounds for 2 months. Instead of performing an exorcism or erasing her memories, I spent 3 days teaching her how to communicate with the entity that had taken residence in her basement. It turned out to be a former resident who had died in the house decades earlier and was simply trying to warn the current occupants about a gas leak that the utility company had missed. We fixed the gas leak, helped the spirit move on, and the woman kept all her memories of what had happened. She understood what she had experienced, felt empowered by the knowledge that she had helped solve the problem herself, and wasn't traumatized by having months of her life erased. The second case was more complex. A family in Quincy whose teenage son had started speaking in languages that didn't exist. Not Latin or ancient tongues, but completely invented languages with their own grammar and syntax. The church would have classified it as demonic possession. But I could sense something different. The boy wasn't being controlled by an external entity. He was channeling something, acting as a conduit for information that was trying to reach our world. After 2 weeks of careful investigation, I discovered that the languages he was speaking were actually advanced mathematical concepts expressed in verbal form. The boy had somehow become a receiver for a dimensional broadcast, picking up signals from a place where mathematics was communicated through sound rather than symbols. Once we helped him understand what was happening and taught him to control when he tuned into the signals. He went from being a terrified teenager to a mathematical prodigy who could solve equations that stumped university professors. The third case taught me the importance of the work I was doing. A young mother in Brooklyn had been experiencing what she described as time gaps. She would be making breakfast and suddenly find herself standing in her garden 3 hours later with no memory of how she got there. Her family was convinced she was having a breakdown and her doctor wanted to commit her for psychiatric evaluation. But I could sense the real cause immediately. She wasn't losing time. She was slipping between parallel versions of her life, experiencing brief glimpses of how things had turned out differently based on small decisions she had made. The ability was triggered by stress, particularly when she was worried about choices that might affect her children's future. Instead of medicating her or erasing her memories, I spent a month teaching her to control the transitions, to use them as a tool for making better decisions rather than suffering through them as random episodes. She learned to deliberately access these alternate perspectives when facing important choices, giving her a kind of supernatural wisdom about the consequences of different paths. 6 months later, she sent me a thank you card with a photo of her family. They looked happier, more settled. She had used her ability to navigate a job change, a school decision for her oldest child, and a difficult conversation with her erunged mother. The church would have classified her as mentally unstable and erased the whole experience. I helped her become more capable and confident than she had ever been. Word spread quickly through the kind of underground networks that people use when they need help with things they can't discuss openly. Within a year, I was handling 3 or 4 cases per month, all of them successfully resolved without memory erasers or cover-ups. The church wasn't happy about my work, but they couldn't do much to stop me. I wasn't interfering with their cases, wasn't exposing their operations, wasn't causing the kind of public panic they feared. I was just helping people they couldn't or wouldn't help themselves. Father DeMarco remained my unofficial liaison with the church. He would occasionally warn me about cases that were too dangerous for me to handle alone, and I would refer those clients to official church investigators. It wasn't a perfect system, but it worked. The supernatural entity that had been recruiting people with my abilities never approached me directly. Father DeMarco theorized that by choosing my own path, by developing my abilities independently, I had made myself useless to whatever plan it had been developing. It needed people who were desperate, scared, willing to accept help from any source. I was none of those things, but I continued to monitor its activities through the network of people I was helping. Every few months, someone would come to me with a story about being approached by what they described as someone who understood. The encounters always followed the same pattern. The person would be at their lowest point, overwhelmed by abilities they couldn't control, isolated from family and friends who thought they were losing their minds. Then someone would appear, not always the same person, but always someone who seemed to know exactly what they were going through. Someone who offered immediate relief, instant understanding, a way to make the pain stop. The catch was always the same. They had to commit to helping others in the same situation, using their abilities in service of a larger cause that was never clearly explained. Most people accepted the offer. They would disappear for weeks or months, then return with their abilities fully developed, but fundamentally changed. They could still help people experiencing supernatural phenomena, but they approached every case with a kind of ruthless efficiency that reminded me of military training. No patience for negotiation. No interest in understanding the entities they were dealing with. Their job was to eliminate problems quickly and move on to the next case. The few who refused the recruitment offer and came to me instead painted a disturbing picture of what was happening to those who accepted. They described seeing former recruits at later encounters, working in teams of 3 or 4, handling cases with methods that were effective but brutal. No conversation with entities. No attempts at peaceful resolution. Just overwhelming force applied until the phenomena stopped. It was like watching a dark mirror of the church's operations, where the church used established protocols and careful documentation. This organization relied on pure power, where the church at least attempted to help the human subjects understand what had happened to them before erasing their memories. This group simply eliminated all traces of the incidents and moved on. The most disturbing part was how successful they were. Case resolution times that took the church weeks or months were being handled in days or hours. But the long-term consequences were becoming apparent in the communities they had helped. Higher rates of depression and anxiety among family members. Increased reports of electronic malfunctions and minor supernatural incidents. As if their aggressive approach was creating more problems than it solved. Just spreading them out over time and geography. So they were harder to track. 5 years later, I'm still running Romano Consulting. I've helped over 200 people understand and resolve supernatural phenomena in their lives. I've trained 12 other people with similar abilities to work independently, creating the support network I had envisioned. We share resources, consult on difficult cases, and provide backup for each other when needed. The work isn't easy, and it's certainly not safe, but it's honest. The people I help get to keep their memories, their understanding of what they experienced, their sense of agency in resolving their own problems. They go back to their lives stronger and more knowledgeable, not just relieved of a burden they never understood. I still miss my father, and I still wish he had trusted me with the truth while he was alive. But I understand why he waited. This work requires maturity, independence, and the ability to make choices that will affect not just yourself, but everyone around you. He left me everything I needed to make the right choice. The knowledge, the tools, the evidence, and most importantly, the understanding that the choice was mine to make. The work isn't finished. Probably never will be. But it's being done honestly now with respect for the people who need help and faith in their ability to handle the truth. And that's exactly what Dad would have wanted. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Wilderness Protocol. If you made it through this report and wish to be briefed on future incidents, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.